Have you ever wondered what relics still guard the secrets of kings, gods, and forgotten worlds? Welcome to Timeless Secrets, where history's most mysterious artifacts come alive. Please subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's begin. The stone that drew the ocean. The ocean was never silent around the island of Pohnpei. Its tides breathed in slow rhythms, drawing white foam across the reef and pulling it back into depths where coral and shadow mingled. The people of this island had always lived in a dialogue with the sea, listening to its moods, feeling its temper, shaping their days to the rise and fall of waves. Yet there was one place on this island where water seemed to listen back, where stone appeared to hold a language that no voice could reproduce. That place was Nan Madol. It was unlike any other settlement in the Pacific. Spread across a shallow lagoon, hundreds of islets stood upon foundations of black basalt pillars, long, hexagonal stones, stacked with precision into walls that rose from the sea itself. No mortar bound them, yet they endured, holding firm against storms, earthquakes, and the endless surge of salt water. Here chiefs once lived and ruled, priests whispered rituals, and the sacred was bound into the very architecture of stone and tide. And within this city on the water, there was said to be one pillar that differed from the rest, a stone that held the ocean's attention, as if it had been drawn from the deep, not by human hand but by the sea itself. The people called it the stone that drew the ocean, a pillar whose surface was always damp, where water trickled even when the lagoon was still, and where fish sometimes gathered, though no bait was cast. Legends of this stone, and of the city it anchored, spread across the generations. Some told of sorcerers who floated the basalt through the air, guiding the columns as if they were reeds rather than rock. Others spoke of gods who raised Nan Madol as their throne, and of a pact between rulers and the sea that demanded offerings of shells, pearls, and sometimes more. But the truth, as with many ancient wonders, was not written down. It was left instead in the silent endurance of the pillars, and in the stories carried by wind and tide. Imagine arriving at Nan Madol long after its rulers had vanished, as many explorers did centuries later. You approach by canoe across waters that shimmer a deep blue, punctuated by reefs and channels. Then, the city emerges, stone walls rising directly from the lagoon, canals threading between them like streets, mangroves curling their roots through cracks in basalt. It is a city both abandoned and alive, touched by time yet resistant to decay. Walking along the ruins, you notice how the pillars have been placed. Each one is massive, some 20 feet long, weighing many tons. They lean together in careful arrangements, their hexagonal faces fitting as if designed for this purpose. They are not carved into shape, they are natural formations, volcanic basalt cooled in geometric order. Yet to quarry them, transport them, and raise them into walls without iron tools or beasts of burden seems nearly impossible. The stone that drew the ocean stands in one of the central enclosures. Its surface glistens in the filtered light, as though it sweats water. Local fishermen once said that the tides obeyed its rhythm, that when it darkened the fish would vanish from the shallows, and when it gleamed with salt spray the shoals would return. To touch it was said to bring dreams of the sea, visions of waves, storms, and creatures that linger in depths unseen. Nan Madol was not just a city, but a ritual center. Chiefs were buried here, their tombs sealed beneath stone platforms. Priests conducted rites involving fire, water, and offerings that vanished into the sea. Oral traditions spoke of two brothers, Olisipa and Olosopa, who arrived from the west. They were sorcerers who communed with spirits, and they built Nan Madol to honor the god of agriculture and the sea. With magic they lifted the basalt pillars into place, commanding them to float across the water like canoes. When their work was complete, they established a dynasty, the Saudilur lords, who ruled over Pohnpei for centuries. The stone that drew the ocean, some said, was their anchor. The first pillar raised, the point from which all other walls spread outward. Without it, the city would have crumbled into the tide. Night at Nan Madol was something else entirely. With the sun gone, the basalt walls absorbed moonlight and shimmered faintly, their wet surfaces glistening like scales. The tide whispered through channels, lapping softly against stone. Crabs scuttled across the walls, their legs clicking in quiet rhythms. Mangroves creaked where roots touched water. In that silence, the stone that drew the ocean seemed to pulse. Villagers who once lived nearby said you could hear it, like a distant drumbeat beneath the waves, steady and low. Some swore it was the heartbeat of the city, others the breath of the sea itself. Even today, divers report a strange sensation near that pillar, as though the water thickens, sound dampens, and movement grows heavy. Legends grew darker over time. Some claimed that sacrifices had been offered at the pillar, fish, birds, and even human lives, cast into the depths so that the sea would not reclaim the city. Others whispered of the last Saudilur rulers, who grew cruel, demanding tributes of breadfruit and yam until their subjects starved. The stone, once a blessing, became a reminder of tyranny, until revolt swept the dynasty away. Yet the pillar remained. It did not judge. It did not speak. It simply stood, drawing the ocean to its side, year after year. Archaeologists who study Nan model today see it as one of the most extraordinary feats of Pacific Island culture. They measure the stones, trace the quarries where basalt was split, and map the complex network of canals that link the islets. They calculate the labor it would have required: thousands of workers, decades of construction, ingenious systems of leverage, and canoe transport. Yet even they admit that the scale of the city surpasses easy explanation. Why here, upon a shallow reef, far from fertile land and fresh water, would such an immense city be built? Why risk the power of the sea, raising walls that seem destined to sink back into the lagoon? Theories abound: a sacred center to separate rulers from commoners, a fortress against rivals, or a symbolic throne from which to command both land and ocean. The stone that drew the ocean offers no answers. It is a mystery within a greater mystery. As centuries passed, nature reclaimed Nan Madol. Mangroves wound their roots into walls, storms collapsed towers, fish claimed canals as their own. Yet the layout remained, the geometry of a city half on land, half in sea, preserved in its basalt bones. Travelers who came upon it often could not believe it was human-made. They likened it to lost Atlantis, a drowned kingdom rising from the deep. Standing before the stone that drew the ocean, one could not help but wonder what memory it held. Did it recall the chants of priests, the sound of drums across water, the laughter of children born in houses now ruined? Did it remember the moment it was lifted, impossibly, from quarry to lagoon? Or was it simply stone, indifferent to stories humans draped upon it? Perhaps the sea knew, for the ocean remembers in its own way, through shells ground to sand, through reefs that build upon bones of the old, through tides that repeat endlessly while kingdoms rise and fall. Nan Madol remains though silent, and the pillar remains with it. Even now, when rain falls heavy upon Pohnpei and the lagoon swells, locals say the stone grows brighter, its surface slick and shining as though it welcomes the storm. It does not move, but the ocean shifts around it, as if pulled by something unseen. The stone that drew the ocean does not explain itself. It does not reveal why it was chosen, or how it came to rest in this city on the water. It waits, as it has always waited, listening to tides, holding its silence, watching the centuries pass. And in that silence lies its power. The pendant that cried red. The soil of Suffolk, in eastern England, has always been heavy with memory. Beneath its damp fields and hedgerows, beneath furrows cut by plows and roots of hawthorn trees, lie the layers of lives lived long before. It is a land that has watched Romans come and leave, Saxons settle, Normans build, and peasants till. It has absorbed iron spearheads, silver coins, shards of pottery, and the bones of countless generations. And in one corner of this earth, beneath a quiet orchard, something once slept for more than 1,500 years, the Hoxne Hoard. The hoard was unlike any other. Found by chance in 1992, by a farmer searching for a lost hammer, it revealed itself as a treasure chest from the late Roman world. Gold and silver tableware, ornaments, coins, over 15,000 pieces in all, lay buried in a wooden chest, wrapped in cloth and leather, concealed in haste but preserved by the silence of soil. Among them glittered an object less imposing than a golden spoon or a silver ladle, but in its quiet way more haunting. It was an amber pendant, small enough to rest in a palm, smooth and glowing with a red so deep it seemed alive. Light passed through it like wine through glass, shifting in tone as it moved. Those who first uncovered it said it looked as though the pendant had been weeping, its surface streaked with tiny fissures, as if frozen tears had bled within the amber itself. They called it the pendant that cried red. Amber is unlike other stones. It is not mined from rock but born from trees, the hardened resin of forests long vanished. Millions of years ago, pines bled their sap, golden and sticky, catching insects, leaves, even air bubbles in their grasp. Over centuries, buried in earth and sand, the resin hardened into something jewel-like, capturing not only form but time itself. A piece of amber is a fragment of a vanished forest, a relic that carries within it a moment so small yet eternal. To the Romans, amber was not merely decorative. It was medicine, protection, a substance that seemed to contain fire. They called it succinum, the juice of trees, and believed it could heal fevers, soothe spirits, and ward off misfortune. To wear amber close to the body was to carry with you a spark of warmth, a charm against darkness. The Hoxne pendant was more than a trinket. Its surface was polished into a teardrop shape, drilled for suspension, perhaps once hung upon a fine chain, but within it, the red was unusually deep, glowing not with honeyed light, but with the color of blood and sunset. When tilted, it seemed to shift from gold to crimson, as though the stone itself contained movement, as though it held some silent memory of fire and sorrow. Imagine the pendant being worn in Roman Britain in the early 5th century. The island was in turmoil. The legions had withdrawn, the empire itself trembled under invasion and division. For the wealthy, life was suddenly fragile. Villas that once echoed with feasts now fell silent. Roads became unsafe. Silver spoons and golden coins could no longer guarantee safety. Perhaps it was during such fear that the hoard was buried, precious possessions hidden away, never to be reclaimed by their owner. The amber pendant may have belonged to a woman of rank. She may have worn it at feasts, where candles reflected in its surface, turning her movements into a play of fire and shadow. Or she may have clutched it during prayers, asking unseen gods for protection. Perhaps she wept into it, holding it as news came of raids or famine, as the empire slipped further from certainty. To those who found it centuries later, it seemed to embody those tears. The fissures that ran through it looked like veins, red as if the pendant itself had bled. In the soil, time had pressed its weight upon it, and yet it endured, carrying its color, carrying its sorrow. Amber always seemed alive to those who studied it. The Greeks noticed that when rubbed, amber produced sparks, attracting small pieces of straw or ash. From this came the word electron, the root of our word electricity. To them, amber was not dead matter, but something with a pulse, a hidden force. The Romans, too, believed it had a soul. Pliny the Elder, writing in his Natural History, described amber as the tears of the Heliades, the weeping sisters of Phaethon, whose grief turned to resin, hardening into stone that glowed with sunlight. If amber was tears, then the Hoxne pendant was their deepest drop. It carried within it a sorrow that seemed unspoken, a story not written in ink but in red glimmers beneath its polished skin. To hold it was to wonder whose tears it had caught, whose grief it had outlived. The hoard itself was vast. Hundreds of gold coins, silver spoons engraved with Christian Chimú symbols, chains and buckles, delicate pepper pots in the shape of ladies with elaborate hair. Yet among such wealth, the amber pendant stood apart. It was not gold, not silver, not something struck with imperial images. It was older, deeper, elemental. It seemed to speak not of empire, but of earth and forest, of time beyond Roman rule. Perhaps that is why it was kept, treasured even when fortunes were waning. In a hoard where spoons and coins could be counted, weighed, and valued, the pendant offered something different. It was a talisman, a private possession that carried the intangible, comfort, belief, protection against the unknown. Night falls, and you imagine the pendant lying in darkness, buried beneath Suffolk soil for over a millennium. Above it, seasons turn, plows scrape, rain soaks, frost hardens. People live entire lives without knowing that beneath their feet, a Roman woman's pendant lies hidden. Generations are born and die. Wars rage and fade, and still the amber keeps its silent glow. Then, one day the soil parts, a hand reaches in, and the pendant is lifted once more into the light. After 15 centuries, it glimmers as though it had been waiting all along, as though it had never stopped weeping. To look into amber is to look into stillness. Bubbles of ancient air, insects frozen mid-flight, fragments of leaves long rotted elsewhere, these live on within amber, preserved against time's erasure. The Hoxne pendant contained no insect, no leaf, only the depth of red. Yet that red itself seemed alive, as if light passing through it was blood flowing once again. Some who gazed upon it said it looked like a drop of the sun. Others said it resembled a wound, a piece of frozen fire. Yet all agreed it seemed too full of meaning for so small an object. The pendant that cried red became one of the quiet mysteries of the hoard. Scholars could catalog its dimensions, trace its origin to Baltic amber, trade it across Europe, and date it to the late Roman world. But none could say why it seemed to hold sorrow, why its fissures gleamed like tears, why those who looked upon it felt the weight of stories untold. Today it rests in a museum, among the silver and gold of the Hoxne Hoard. Visitors lean close to its glass case, seeing themselves reflected faintly in its surface, as if caught within the amber's memory. Children notice its glow, adults its fissures. Everyone sees the red that will not fade. The pendant holds no inscription, no name of its owner. Its history must be imagined, a woman wearing it at a feast, a hurried burial in troubled times, centuries of silence underground. Yet in its small body of amber, it carries something larger. The truth that objects can hold emotion, that stone can remember sorrow, that beauty can outlast empire. It is only a pendant, smooth and red, yet it is also a fragment of tears, a droplet of fire, a voice of forests gone and lives forgotten. The pendant that cried red endures, and though it does not speak, it seems to listen, and in that silence, one almost hears it still weeping. The crown that sank with a queen. In the heart of the Indian Ocean lies Madagascar, vast and green, a land of mountains and rivers, forests that breathe with 1,000 voices, and coasts where waves beat endlessly upon red earth. For centuries, it was a place apart, a world with its own rhythms, its own kingdoms, and its own mysteries. To the outside world, it seemed distant, almost unreachable, a vast island guarding its secrets with cliffs, reefs, and the deep sea. And among the secrets of this island, whispered of even now, is the tale of a crown of gold and gems, worn by a queen who ruled with an iron will and a mind sharp as a blade, a crown that dazzled in sunlight, catching fire in every jewel, a crown that once represented power, fear, and defiance against the world beyond Madagascar's shores. They say this crown, the crown of Queen Ranavalona, sank, and was lost, perhaps swallowed by earth, perhaps carried away by sea, perhaps hidden in the folds of history itself. Queen Ranavalona I ruled Madagascar in the 19th century, between 1828 and 1861. To her people she was both protector and tormentor, both mother and tyrant. To foreigners she was infamous, known as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, though in truth she was neither mad nor simple. She was deliberate, calculating, and determined that no outsider, no European empire would rule her land. At her coronation, she wore the crown that would come to symbolize her reign. Forged of gold, heavy and bright, the crown bore patterns of traditional Malagasy artistry, alongside jewels gifted by Europeans who sought favor at court. Emeralds and sapphires gleamed beside red stones that seemed to echo the island's burning soil. At its peak rose a delicate golden spire shaped like a cross, a signal both of sovereignty and of her uneasy dealings with Christianity. The crown shone under the highland sun of Antananarivo, the capital city. It was not simply decoration. To Ranavalona, it was armor of another kind, a visible, unyielding sign of her power, a reminder to all that she stood between Madagascar and the empires that circled like sharks in the surrounding seas. The Queen's court was a place of ceremony and severity. Foreign envoys who visited described processions of soldiers, drums echoing across the hills, banners snapping in the wind, and at the center Ranavalona, veiled yet crowned, a figure both regal and forbidding. Her crown seemed to catch the gaze of all, its jewels flashing like the eyes of the ancestors. In private, too, the crown mattered. It was worn in rituals that bound the queen to the land itself, linking her to the power of the ancestors and the sovereign spirits. For in Madagascar, rulership was never merely political, it was spiritual, a weaving together of the living and the dead, the earth and the sky, and yet, for all its brilliance, the crown carried a shadow. It was the emblem of a reign marked by executions, forced labor, and isolation from the wider world. Ranavalona's policies were ruthless. She resisted European influence with ferocity, expelling missionaries, punishing converts, and ensuring Madagascar remained independent at a time when Africa was being carved apart. For some, her crown was a beacon of defiance, for others, it was a symbol of oppression. Time moved slowly on an island. The crown passed through ceremonies, through seasons, always gleaming above the queen's head. It witnessed treaties made and broken, punishments delivered, armies gathered. It saw the queen grow older, her hair silver beneath its weight, her eyes harder with each passing year, and then, in 1861, Queen Ranavalona died. Her death was both an ending and a release. To some it was the closing of an age of terror, to others it was the loss of the shield that had kept foreign powers at bay. But all wondered what would become of her crown. Some say it was passed on, worn briefly by successors. Some whisper it was stolen, hidden, or even cursed, and others tell that in the turbulence that followed her death, the crown disappeared entirely, as though unwilling to rest on another's head. Stories diverge. Some say the crown was buried with her, lowered into a royal tomb among the hills, locked away from time. Others say it was taken from the palace during later wars and rebellions, smuggled out, lost in a river crossing, or carried away by sea and sunk beneath the waves. A crown so heavy with meaning could not vanish without leaving behind echoes, and so the legend grew. The crown that sank with a queen, amber, gold, jade, silver. Such substances survive centuries, even millennia, yet the power they represent does not endure so easily. Ranavalona's crown, in every tale, is not simply an object but a reminder of the force of one will, one woman who stood against empires. To find it would be to touch the memory of her defiance, her stubborn sovereignty, and yet perhaps the crown cannot be found. Perhaps it was meant to be lost. Some Malagasy elders speak of the land itself swallowing the crown, drawing it back into the earth, unwilling for it to be paraded in foreign museums. Others say the sea took it, waves pulling it down into darkness, so that it gleams now only where no human eye may see. If so, it lies among corals and fish, its gems clouded but still glimmering faintly in shafts of sunlight that pierce the water. Crabs crawl over it, shells cling to it, yet it remains whole, the last witness of a queen who feared no empire. To think of the crown is to think of Ranavalona herself. She was feared, admired, hated, and respected. She defied France and Britain alike, resisted missionaries, and preserved her island's independence for more than 3 decades. Her crown was the outward sign of this unyielding will, and so perhaps it could not outlive her. To be worn by another would be to dilute its meaning. To vanish with her was to keep its power pure. The people of Madagascar still tell her story in hushed tones. Some remember her cruelty, the deaths of thousands, the forced labor, the endless trials. Others recall her strength, the way she refused to bow to colonial demands, the way she preserved the island's sovereignty when so much of Africa was falling under European rule. Both truths exist side by side, reflected in the crown that shone so brightly and then was gone. Imagine, now, standing in the royal hill of Antananarivo. The air is thin, the grass moves in wind that carries both dust and memory. You close your eyes and hear the drums of coronation, the gasps of foreign envoys as the crown flashes in sunlight, the whispered prayers of subjects bowing low. Then you open your eyes and see only the empty palace grounds, stone walls against sky, and the absence where the crown once was. Somewhere, beneath soil or sea, it may still lie, its jewels dulled but not gone, its gold weathered but not broken. And in its silence it continues the story of a queen who ruled fiercely, who held back empires, and who left behind a legend bound not only in history but in mystery. The crown that sank with a queen remains one of the great secrets of Madagascar, and perhaps that is fitting. For what object could fully capture a reign so full of shadow and flame? What object could bear the weight of both defiance and cruelty, both protection and oppression? Perhaps only a crown, and perhaps only one that is hidden, its final resting place, unknown. And so the crown lingers, not on any head, not in any museum, but in story. In whispers passed down, in legends told by firelight, in the minds of those who imagine its gleam beneath waves or soil. The crown that sank with a queen, gleaming still in memory, untouchable, eternal. The bell that waited in sand. In the heart of Southeast Asia, in a land of golden pagodas, misty hills, and rivers that twist through jungles like strands of silver thread, there once stood a bell, unlike any other. It was not a mere bell meant for temples or for calling worshippers to prayer. It was, according to chronicles, the largest bell ever cast by human hands, so vast and heavy that even the earth seemed to bow beneath its weight. Known as the Great Bell of Dhammazedi, it was said to be a bell of such purity, such resonance, that when struck, its sound could travel across the delta and beyond the great river plains of Myanmar, lingering in the air like the voice of eternity itself. And yet today, the bell lies hidden, smothered in silence, not beneath the spires of a temple, but deep beneath the sand and waters of a riverbed, waiting like a forgotten memory for the day when it might be seen again. The story of the bell begins in the 15th century, during the reign of King Dhammazedi, a powerful monarch of the Mon kingdom. He ruled over a time of both piety and grandeur, when kings sought to leave behind monuments that would endure longer than their reigns. Temples rose from the earth, monasteries filled with the chanting of monks, and relics were enshrined to honor the Buddha. Yet none of these acts of devotion would be as extraordinary as the bell he commissioned, for he imagined not just a symbol of faith, but a sound so vast it could ripple through the hearts of all who heard it. Dhammazedi, they say, ordered that no expense be spared. From the farthest corners of his realm, metal was gathered. Copper, tin, silver, and even gold. Common villagers contributed coins, merchants donated ingots, and nobles gave treasures from their households. Legend holds that even jewelry and ornaments once belonging to queens and courtiers were melted down into the molten pool that would become the body of the bell. In this way, the bell was not simply a creation of artisans, it was forged from the offerings of an entire people. Each piece of metal, whether humble or precious, carried with it the story of a life, a hope, a prayer. When at last the bell was cast, it stood as an object so monumental that chroniclers struggled to describe its size. Some claimed it weighed over 200 tons, others said more. Its surface shone with a sheen that caught the light of the sun, and its mouth was wide enough for a grown man to step inside. Inscribed upon it were prayers, blessings, and the words of devotion from the king himself. It was carried with great difficulty to the Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon, a stupa already rising toward the heavens, wrapped in gold, gleaming as though it were touched by dawn. There the bell was suspended, and when the monks struck it, its voice thundered like the sky itself, rolling across the land, a sound of such depth that people would pause in their fields, fall to their knees, and believe they were hearing the echo of the Buddha's compassion made into sound. For centuries, the bell remained at Shwedagon. Pilgrims would journey for days, weeks, even months to stand beneath its shadow and place their hands upon its bronze surface. They believed it held blessings, that its sound purified sins, and that to touch it was to be part of something eternal. But greatness, as history has often shown, attracts not only reverence but greed. The 16th century brought change to Myanmar. European traders and mercenaries sailed into its harbors, eager for spices, gems, and gold. Among them were the Portuguese, whose captains saw in the land not only opportunity, but treasures ripe for the taking. One such man, Felipe de Brito, came to power in Thaniine, near the mouth of the Yangon River, A mercenary turned warlord, he sought to enrich himself, and when word of the bell reached him, he saw not a sacred object but a fortune in metal waiting to be seized. De Brito marched his men to Shwedagon and ordered the bell to be taken. With axes, ropes, and brute strength, they lowered it from its place of honor. Monks and villagers wept and protested, but against armed men, their cries were powerless. De Brito had the bell dragged across the land, bound for his stronghold where he planned to melt it down and recast its bronze into cannons for war. But transporting such a behemoth was no simple feat. Oxen strained, carts splintered, and men groaned as they tried to move the massive weight. Finally it was loaded onto a barge and floated upon the Yangon River, bound downstream, and it was there, upon the waters, that fate intervened. The sheer mass of the bell proved too much for the vessel. The barge tilted, the ropes snapped, and with a groan like the breaking of the world, the Great Bell of Dhammazedi slipped into the river. It fell with such force that the waters boiled around it, waves lashing at the banks, before it disappeared into the depths. The Portuguese soldiers, shocked and powerless, watched as the fortune they had risked so much to steal sank beyond their reach. And there, beneath the silt and sand, the bell has remained ever since. Centuries have passed, yet the bell still stirs the imagination. Divers have searched, governments have announced expeditions, and engineers have drawn plans to recover it. But the river is not easily tamed. The Yangon, broad and muddy, hides its secrets well. Silt shifts with the current, burying and uncovering fragments of stone and wreckage, but never revealing the great prize. Some say the bell lies so deep that no human hand will ever raise it again. Others whisper that it has become fused with the earth, more myth than metal now. Yet, every so often, a new rumor emerges. A diver claims to have glimpsed it in the gloom. Fishermen speak of strange shapes caught in their nets, and fortune seekers arrive with hopes of finding it once and for all. To imagine the bell waiting beneath the water is to imagine silence heavier than sound. The monks who once struck it are long gone. The king who commissioned it is dust. The Portuguese who tried to steal it are names in a chronicle. But still, the bell endures, and what is more haunting, that it may yet be raised, or that it may never rise again. For if it were lifted from the riverbed, if it were brought back into the light of day, could it ever be the same? The monks would strike it, yes, and the sound might travel once more across the plains. Yet perhaps the centuries of silence have altered it. Perhaps the bell has absorbed the weight of history, the grief of its loss, the prayers of those who still whisper its name. Perhaps if it were struck now, its tone would be unlike any ever heard before, not just bronze on bronze, but the voice of centuries, the echo of a king's devotion, a people's offering, and the endless waiting of the river. And so it waits, in sand and shadow, a relic not of stone or gold, but of sound itself. The bell of Dhammazedi, the bell that once filled the skies with its voice, now keeps its silence at the bottom of the river. Yet silence too has power. It draws the curious, it haunts the dreamers. It whispers to those who pass by its waters that some things are not so easily lost, that some voices are never truly stilled. The bell does not ring, but perhaps in its silence, it speaks louder than ever. The helmet that refused a warrior. Beneath the scorching Mesopotamian sun, in the dust of the land once called Sumer, the ruins of rise like broken teeth above the desert. The city that was once crowned with ziggurats, filled with markets, and lit by the flickering flames of oil lamps, is now a shadow, silent and hollow. But buried beneath its clay, within tombs where kings and queens lay with their attendants, treasures of unfathomable age have been found. Among them, one object stands apart, not because it is the most ornate, nor because it is wrought of the rarest materials, but because of the haunting tale that has been told of it. A helmet, beaten from copper, burnished by craftsmen more than 4,000 years ago. A helmet that, they say, refused to serve its master. A helmet that never knew the sound of war, but instead carried with it silence, questions, and the weight of destiny denied. To speak of this helmet is to step back into a world that was both strange and familiar. A world where rivers dictated the rhythm of life. The Tigris and Euphrates, swelling with flood and shrinking to thirsty beds, gave rise to the cradle of civilization. It was here that writing was invented, that kings first etched their names into clay, that temples rose to gods with the heads of lions and the wings of eagles, and it was here that men first learned to clad themselves in armor, to fashion weapons of bronze, and to march in ranks under the banners of their city-states. Was not just any city, it was the beating heart of Sumer. Its ziggurat rose like a mountain above the plain, a stairway for men to approach the gods. Its walls encircled temples, workshops, and palaces, and its rulers, those who styled themselves Lugal, great kings, claimed to speak for the gods themselves. And yet beneath the glory of lay a darker truth. The tombs. When kings died, they did not go alone. They were buried with their queens, their servants, their guards, their musicians, and their treasures. Archaeologists who opened these pits in the early 20th century found rows of skeletons lying in neat order, adorned with jewelry and weapons, as if ready to rise again in service. Among them, in the most celebrated of these tombs, the helmet was found. The helmet itself was simple yet powerful in form. Hammered copper sheets had been beaten into the shape of a human head, smooth and rounded, fitting closely over the skull. The eyes were almond-shaped, the nose long and defined, the lips firm, the ears carefully modeled. It was not a helmet of anonymity, but of identity. It resembled a face, a mask meant to make the warrior more than mortal, to transform him into a figure of both man and god. Unlike later helmets of iron or steel, it bore no visor, no crest. Its strength lay in its symbolism, as much as its substance. It was not just protection, it was presence. But the stories told of this helmet are strange. For while it was made with care, and while it lay among the treasures of kings, there are no signs that it was ever worn in battle. Its surface bears no dents, no scars of blade or arrow. Instead, it gleams as if it was never tested, as if it refused to serve in the bloody business of war. Some say it was a funerary object alone, made not for use, but for burial, meant to accompany a ruler into the afterlife. Others whisper that it was cursed, that the one who was meant to wear it never could, that when he placed it upon his head, fate turned against him, and the helmet chose silence instead of glory. Who was the warrior it was meant for? Perhaps a prince of Ur, groomed for rule, raised on tales of Gilgamesh and the heroes of old. A youth who had trained with bow and spear, who had stood on the ramparts and looked out across the fields where enemies might come. A youth for whom this helmet was made, so that in the day of battle he might shine as a god among men. And yet that day never came. Perhaps he died young, taken by fever before the helmet could crown his head. Perhaps he was betrayed, his throne usurped, his destiny stolen. Or perhaps, as some legends murmur, the helmet itself resisted him, that when he placed it upon his brow, it slid away, heavy as stone, rejecting his claim. And so it was buried not as a relic of victory, but as a relic of refusal. The tombs of Ur speak of lives cut short, of loyalty that ended in death. Attendants drank poison, musicians laid down their lyres, guards rested their spears, all to accompany their master into the darkness beyond. Among these, the helmet lay, its copper surface reflecting the light of oil lamps that flickered for the last time before the tomb was sealed. For millennia it slept in silence, buried beneath the shifting sands. Dynasties rose and fell above it, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks. Empires came like storms and vanished, yet the helmet endured, unseen, unheard. When it was finally uncovered by archaeologists in the 1920s and 30s, led by Leonard Woolley, it emerged as if from a dream. Imagine the moment, workers brushing away clay and sand, their hands trembling as the shape of a human face appeared, not bone but metal. The copper gleamed in the sunlight for the first time in 4,000 years, and those who looked upon it felt the weight of history pressing down. This was no mere object. This was a voice from the deep past, a face of a man who never spoke, a warrior who never fought. Scholars debated its meaning. Was it ceremonial, a mask to mark the sacredness of kingship? Was it a true helmet, meant for war but unused? Was it a symbol, a reminder that kings were not only men, but embodiments of divine power? Each theory deepened the mystery, for no answer could explain why it bore no wounds, why it remained so untouched. Some suggested that it had been placed deliberately upon a body, yet no traces of wear remained. Others speculated that it was meant not for a man at all, but for a statue of a god, an offering to the divine rather than to flesh. But whispers cling to objects as much as facts do. Locals who heard of the helmet spoke of it as unlucky, a piece of metal that had denied its master, and so carried with it a silence that could not be broken. They said the helmet had chosen not to know war, and that in doing so, it had defied its very purpose. Some even claimed that to wear it now would invite misfortune, that the one who placed it upon their head would be denied their destiny, just as the Prince of Ur had been. And yet there is another way to see it. Perhaps the helmet's refusal was not a curse, but a gift. For while other weapons rusted, while other armor bore the scars of death, this helmet endured unbroken. It became not a relic of violence, but a relic of peace. It tells us not of the battles fought and lost, but of the silence that stretched across centuries, untouched by blood. In the museums where it rests today, displayed beneath soft lights, people pause before it. They gaze into its copper face, at eyes that do not see, at lips that do not speak, and they feel the presence of a world impossibly distant. The helmet seems to look back at them, to ask questions without words. Who are you? Who live now? What battles do you fight? What destiny do you pursue? And what will remain of you when the sands cover your bones? The helmet is heavy with absence. It is not the absence of meaning, but the absence of what might have been. A warrior denied, a battle unfought, a sound never heard, and yet in that absence lies its power. For we are left to imagine, to wonder, to fill the silence with our own stories. Objects that are complete tell us only what was. Objects like this, unfinished, withheld, tell us what might have been, and that is often more haunting. So the helmet of waits, as it has always waited. It waited for its warrior, and he never came. It waited in the tomb, and the sands claimed it. It waited in silence, and was finally unearthed. And now it waits again, in the halls of scholars, and among the curious gazes of strangers, carrying with it the refusal of a destiny, the echo of a silence that has endured longer than most empires. And perhaps that is its greatest triumph, for while swords break, while empires crumble, while kings are forgotten, this helmet endures, not as a tool of war, but as a voice of refusal. It tells us that not every object must serve its purpose, that sometimes in refusing, a thing may become more than it was ever meant to be. The helmet of the helmet that refused a warrior, remains a paradox, a face without a voice, an armor without a battle, a silence louder than war. The figurine that breathed smoke, beneath the dry winds of Peru's north coast, where the desert brushes against the restless Pacific, there lies a ruined city of walls and sand, Chan Chan, once the heart of the Chimú kingdom. Its adobe palaces stretch like a labyrinth, decorated with endless reliefs of waves, fish, and birds, for this was a people whose world was carved by the sea. Long before the Inca swept them into empire, the Chimú thrived here, trading, fishing, and building a city so vast that even its ruins seem to whisper with the hum of thousands of lives now gone. And deep within those ruins, beneath layers of wind-blown sand and centuries of silence, archaeologists unearthed something that seemed impossibly fragile for a world of dust and sun. A wooden idol, carved into the shape of a man, its face stretched into solemn stillness, its body standing stiff as if it were a sentry at the gates of time. Yet the most unsettling thing was not its form, it was the blackened surface, the scars that suggested it had once been kissed by smoke, as if it had stood in the path of fire, not destroyed, but infused with it. The figurine seemed to have been placed deliberately, not discarded, not broken, but positioned to watch. Its height was modest, perhaps a meter, yet it carried a presence larger than any human frame. Its painted eyes, faint though they had faded, hinted that it once bore color, a vividness now stolen by centuries. And the more scholars studied it, the more questions arose. Was it an offering, a guardian, a representation of a god whose name is now forgotten? Or was it a silent witness to ceremonies that the desert swallowed whole? The Chimú, inheritors of Moche traditions and masters of desert survival, were people of both earth and sea. Their irrigation systems bent rivers to their will. Their artisans wove gold and silver with such skill that the Spanish would later melt their treasures down in greed and fear. Yet for all their splendor, the Chimú left us only fragments of their inner world, shadows of ritual and symbol, glimpses caught in clay vessels, in murals and in wood. The wooden idol, darkened with smoke, is one of those fragments, so small and yet so heavy with mystery. Imagine a moonlit ceremony within the adobe halls. The idol stands upright, surrounded by offerings, shells, maize, copper, feathers. Smoke rises from burning resin or from torches, curling in the night air, wrapping the figurine, seeping into its grain. Priests chant, voices echoing against the walls, calling upon gods of the sea, gods of fertility, gods who demanded balance between water and desert. The figurine, its wooden body porous and alive, absorbs the smoke, becomes stained by it, transformed into more than wood, into a vessel of presence. For those who bowed before it, it was no mere carving, it was a bridge. Archaeologists found it near a ceremonial platform, suggesting it was no ordinary household idol, but something bound to state ritual, perhaps even sacrifice. Some believe it represented Nalamp, the legendary founder of northern kingdoms, a figure said to have arrived by sea on a great raft, bringing knowledge and order. Others see in it a guardian of the dead, a sentinel placed to protect tombs from intruders, a role carved in wood but sanctified in smoke. The idol's survival itself is strange. Wood rarely endures in such climates, yet the desert preserved it, though scarred and blackened, as if it resisted destruction not once but many times. Some who studied it noted that the burn marks were too even, too deliberate, to be accidental. Perhaps it was passed through smoke intentionally, not as an accident of fire, but as a ritual act repeated over generations. Fire as purification, fire as transformation. The Chimú were not strangers to smoke. Their rituals often invoked the burning of offerings, shells, maize, textiles, or fragrant woods. Smoke was a messenger, a way of carrying prayers upward, a visible thread between human breath and divine ear. To breathe smoke was to consume the essence of sacrifice, to become infused with what was given. The figurine, then, may have been more than an image. It was a body that consumed, a vessel that inhaled what was meant for gods. And yet, to modern eyes, its stillness is unsettling. To stand before it is to sense the weight of forgotten ceremonies, the echo of chants in a language no longer spoken. The idol is mute, but in its silence there lingers a kind of breath, a reminder that the boundary between object and living presence was not so firm to those who made it. To them the figurine may have breathed indeed, if not with lungs, then with the smoke that filled its form. As the Inca expanded, they absorbed the Chimú, dismantling much of their culture, weaving it into their own imperial fabric. Later the Spanish came, and with them fire and looting. Temples were broken, gold melted, rituals banned. Wooden idols like this were often burned, their ashes scattered, their meanings erased. And yet this one survived, blackened but whole, hidden beneath the sands, waiting centuries until hands of strangers lifted it back into the sun. Its discovery reignited questions not just about the Chimú, but about how much of human history rests in fragile things. A figurine no taller than a child's arm, and yet it whispers of a civilization's spirit, a world's way of breathing. It tells us that what survives is often what was never meant to endure, that memory clings to the smallest of vessels, carrying across centuries not clarity but mystery. Scholars debate still, was it smoke from incense, from torches, from ritual fire? Was it accident or design? Was the figurine meant to absorb, to carry, or to witness? Each answer seems incomplete, as if the idol itself refuses to yield its truth. Perhaps that is its power, not to explain, but to remain, to keep breathing through the questions it sparks, and so the figurine that breathed smoke endures, a wooden sentinel of a vanished kingdom, not alive, not dead, not forgotten. Its presence lingers in museum halls now, far from the desert winds that once caressed it, far from the chants that once gave it voice. Yet even here, in sterile light, it carries with it the blackened breath of centuries, the smoke of rituals that no flame can ever fully extinguish. The Chimú are gone, their empire folded into others, their voices lost to time, but in this idol, carved in wood and scarred by fire, there is a strange endurance, a reminder that even the most fragile of materials can outlast empires. It is a paradox, a question without answer, a figurine that still seems to breathe though no chest rises, no lungs stir. It breathes not air, but memory, and memory, like smoke, clings, curls, and refuses to vanish. The jewel that remembered fire. In the soft darkness of history, where stories become legends and legends become whispers, there lies a jewel that has outlived empires, carried on crowns and swords, seen courts drenched in gold and palaces drowned in blood. It has traveled from the burning sands of Persia to the jeweled halls of India, from the shadows of Afghan fortresses to the polished vaults of the British crown. Its name, in Persian, meant Mountain of Light. Yet those who carried it often knew another side of its glow, a shadow that seemed to fall across rulers who dared to claim it. The Koh-i-Noor. It is, at first glance, simply a diamond stone made from Earth's own pressure, clear as frozen light, cut and recut to catch the gaze of those who look at it. And yet, behind its brilliance, it carries centuries of memory, as if within its facets lie the reflections of every kingdom that has risen and fallen in its presence. They say diamonds are forever, but this one seems to remember. It remembers fire, not only of the sun but of ambition, betrayal, and the blood of kings. Long before it was called Koh-i-Noor, it lay buried beneath the Indian earth, pressed in silence through unfathomable years, until human hands, digging in the Golconda mines, pulled it into the light. Some say it was found in the bed of the Krishna River, shimmering against dark silt like a captured star. Others whisper it was once a sacred jewel of temple deities, offered to gods before men claimed it. Its earliest history is veiled, as though the stone itself hides the first names it knew. By the time it entered written memory, it was already bound to conquest. It passed from sultan to sultan, shah to shah, emperor to emperor, like a prize not merely of wealth, but of destiny. In the court of the Mughal emperors, it glittered among thrones built not of wood, but of gold and gemstones. The peacock throne, encrusted with hundreds of jewels, bore the Koh-i-Noor at its heart, a glowing center that seemed to feed the majesty of empire. To sit upon that throne was not only to rule India but to command the envy of the world. And yet, even then, whispers followed it. The diamond brought beauty, but also unrest. Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, placed it among his treasures, but his reign ended in imprisonment by his own son. Aurangzeb, who inherited both throne and jewel, lived to see rebellion tear at the empire's seams. Some chroniclers began to murmur that the stone carried misfortune to men who wore it as their own, a curse not on the jewel itself but on human hunger to own it. When Nader Shah of Persia stormed Delhi in 1739, he seized the peacock throne, stripping the Mughal treasury with ruthless speed. Amid rubies, emeralds, pearls, and rivers of gold, he found the diamond. They say he held it aloft, and the camp gasped at its brilliance. It was then he named it Koh-i-Noor, the Mountain of Light. Yet the same man who carried it back to Persia was later assassinated, his empire fracturing in chaos. The jewel moved again, carried like a silent witness through smoke and fire. From Persia to Afghanistan, from Afghan hands into Sikh power, the stone continued its journey, each passage marked by betrayal, war, or sudden downfall, as though it demanded movement, never resting long with any crown. By the time it came into the possession of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab, it was already legend. Ranjit Singh wore it as symbol, not ornament, a mark that his power could rival empires. Yet upon his death, his kingdom crumbled under the gaze of the British, who came like tides of iron. The diamond, once again, was torn from its resting place. The British claimed it as spoils, sending it across oceans, placing it into Queen Victoria's crown. It gleamed there, set among sapphires and rubies, refracting light at the head of an empire on which the sun was said never to set. Yet even in Britain, the stories clung. Princes and kings preferred that only women wear the stone, fearing the curse of ruin said to befall any man who tried to claim it. So it glittered, not in the crowns of kings but of queens, a jewel radiant yet untouchable. What is it about a stone that makes it seem alive with fate? Perhaps it is the human stories woven around it, each ruler's downfall mirrored in its glow. Perhaps it is the simple truth that diamonds, though lifeless, hold fire within them, the ability to bend light, to make brilliance where there should be none. To those who coveted it, the Koh-i-Noor was more than wealth. It was destiny, a promise of eternal power. Yet power, like light, burns those who hold it too tightly. Imagine the diamond centuries ago, uncut, its form rough, its edges dull compared to the brilliance it would later show. Even then, it must have caught torches, reflecting in shadows of Mughal palaces, passing light across painted walls. Priests may have bowed before it, soldiers may have fought beneath its gleam, kings may have felt their hearts rise at its touch, and in each case, the stone remained unmoved, unfeeling, carrying memory not in words but in reflection. To look upon it was to see not only one's face but also the weight of those who came before. Legends grew that the diamond was once the eye of a goddess, torn from her idol and set into human crowns. Some said it was cursed for being stolen, others that it chose its bearers to humble them. The truth is lost, but the whispers endure. The Koh-i-Noor is not only jewel but symbol of conquest, of theft, of power too vast to be held without consequence. And so, in modern times, the diamond rests within the Tower of London, watched by tourists and guards alike. It lies in glass and light, but still, questions coil around it. Should it remain there, or should it return to the lands from which it was taken? India asks for it. Pakistan asks for it. Afghanistan too. Each claims a share of its history. Each feels its glow belongs to them. Yet the stone is silent. It offers no answer, only reflection. To stand before it is to feel not only awe, but unease. For within its clarity, one sees the shimmer of fire, not flame of candles, but of empires burning, collapsing into dust. One sees kings, who thought themselves eternal, and were proved fragile. One sees soldiers carrying it through bloodied streets, merchants whispering its price, queens wearing it with pride and dread. A mountain of light, yes, but a mountain that remembers. The Koh-i-Noor is not cursed, perhaps, nor blessed. It is a mirror of human ambition. Those who sought it saw themselves in it, magnified, shining, yet exposed. And every empire that claimed it has, in time, fallen, leaving only the diamond to tell its silent tale. It remembers fire, the fire of torches and pillaged palaces, the fire of crowns pressed onto trembling brows, the fire of longing that has never dimmed as nations still reach for it across centuries. And though it cannot speak, it gleams with the truth of history. That power passes, but memory, like light in stone, endures. So it rests now, in a glass case, beneath watchful eyes. Visitors lean close, seeing their own faces multiplied in its facets. For a moment, they too are written into its memory, another flicker in its long journey. And when they turn away, the diamond remains, unmoved, silent, remembering still. It is the jewel that remembered fire, and perhaps, long after kingdoms fade, long after languages fall silent, it will still gleam, carrying with it every empire it has outlived, every shadow it has cast, every flame it has known. The tomb that refused its dead. In the desert, south of Cairo, there is a place that lies in silence, far removed from the crowds that press against the polished stones of Giza or the painted chambers of Saqqara. Few visitors ever walk here, and fewer still know its name. Zawyet el-Aryan. The sand creeps like a tide around half-buried ruins, shifting endlessly as if to conceal them from the living eye. Here stands, or rather slumbers, a monument never completed, a pyramid begun with intent and authority, yet abandoned in its earliest breath of creation. Unlike the famous pyramids, its summit never rose, its walls never enclosed a king, its chambers never received the body for which they were designed. Instead, what remains is an open wound in the desert, a massive trench cut into bedrock, where laborers once toiled, and where stone blocks lie as if discarded mid-sentence. It is a tomb without a king, a project that refused to accept death, a monument whose silence is deeper than that of any finished tomb because it is the silence of a question left unanswered. Why was it abandoned? Who commanded its beginning? And why, in a land where memory was architecture, did this one structure refuse to complete its purpose? The Unfinished Pyramid of Zawyet Ilarion is less known than the wonders of Giza, but in its unfinishedness lies a story even more haunting. It is not the glory of what was achieved, but the mystery of what was denied. The site itself rests only a few kilometers north of Abu Sir, where the 5th dynasty kings raised their sun temples. To the casual wanderer, it appears little more than a hollow rectangle carved into the earth, its sides smooth, its floor deep, its opening like the throat of some ancient quarry. The desert winds sweep into it, whistling against stone surfaces that should have been buried beneath a pyramid's mass, but were left instead to the sky. Archaeologists sometimes call it the Unfinished Pyramid of the 4th dynasty. Others hesitate to assign it even that name, for its builder remains disputed. Was it begun by a forgotten king between Khafre and Menkaure, or perhaps by a short-lived ruler whose name dissolved before it was carved into the stone? A phantom reign, leaving behind only the foundation of an ambition. The trench is enormous, nearly 90 feet deep, with sides that descend into a central chamber-like hollow. At its heart lies a rectangular pit, cut with extraordinary precision into the bedrock. Within it is a massive oval-shaped sarcophagus of polished quartzite, still in place, unfinished, yet astonishing in its size and craftsmanship. Some scholars have suggested it was never meant as a coffin, but as the base of a chamber itself, an experiment in engineering that was abandoned after a fatal miscalculation. Others whisper stranger things, that the builders struck something in the bedrock they could not continue through, that omens appeared in the sky, that the king died before the work could be advanced, and with his death, the pyramid lost its reason to exist. Unlike the pyramids of Giza which soar upward in defiance of time, the tomb of Zawyet Ilarion draws the gaze downward. To stand at its edge is to look into a void, a great square throat descending into the desert. It is as if one gazes into a tomb that never learned to close its mouth. The quartzite basin at the bottom reflects the sun at certain angles, so that the structure seems both a grave and a mirror. Egypt was a civilization obsessed with order, with completion, with the assurance of eternal life. To leave a pyramid unfinished was almost a crime against the cosmic order, against Ma'at, the principle of balance that governed heaven and earth. Yet here balance was broken. The locals who later passed by gave it names heavy with unease. Some avoided it altogether, whispering that spirits gathered in the hollow. Others, centuries later, treated it as a quarry, removing stone blocks that had been half-shaped for construction. Napoleon's scholars during their great survey of Egypt barely mentioned it, noting only its strange appearance, and modern excavations have uncovered more questions than answers. Archaeologists debate whether it belongs to the end of the 4th dynasty or the beginning of the 5th. If the former, it may have been intended for a king such as Nebka, a shadowy ruler known mostly from fragmentary king lists. If the latter, perhaps it belonged to an ephemeral sovereign erased by political upheaval. In both cases, the identity of the absent king remains a void, just like the tomb itself. One of the most intriguing features is the quartzite chamber base. To carve such a massive block and lower it into place would have required tremendous labor, yet no superstructure was ever raised around it. Imagine the thousands of workers, the tens of thousands of man-hours, all spent on a foundation destined to hold nothing. Some theorize the project was abandoned because the bedrock proved unstable. Others suggest political instability or the sudden death of the ruler. Still others argue that the chamber design itself was experimental, and that its failure caused the project's cancellation. Yet there is another possibility, one that makes the tomb of Zawyet Ilarion unique. Perhaps it was never meant for a king at all. Perhaps it was the trial ground for architects experimenting with new forms. If so, it is the fossil of an idea, caught midway between conception and realization. But the desert remembers more than blueprints. Legends grow in the absence of certainty. Travelers passing by in later centuries spoke of sounds from the hollow, of winds that carried voices upward, of jackals that lingered near the edge, staring into the trench as if waiting for something to emerge. The Bedouin avoided camping near it, saying the stars over that hollow seemed brighter, and yet less comforting, as if the heavens themselves refused to look away from a wound in the earth. Even in modern times the site feels unsettling. There are no carved texts, no reliefs of gods and offerings, no painted chambers. It is stripped of all the symbols that normally anchor an Egyptian tomb to eternity. It is bare, raw, unfinished, and in that bareness lies its power. It is a pyramid without memory, and so it provokes memory in those who see it. To walk through Zawyet Ilarion today is to move through a place suspended in time. Each step echoes against stone cut by hands thousands of years dead. Hands that expected their labor to culminate in glory, but instead were silenced mid-work. One can almost hear the chisel strikes frozen in air, as if the workmen only paused for a moment and might yet return, and yet they never did. The tomb that refused its dead remains a hollow monument, a great unfinished book, whose first page was written in stone but whose story never continued. Unlike the Great Pyramids, which speak of kings who conquered eternity, this one speaks of mortality itself, of failure, of endings that came too soon. The mystery of Zawyet Ilarion deepens with every attempt to explain it. Some archaeologists claim its secrets remain underground, beneath sand that has refilled parts of the trench. Others believe the answers are lost forever, erased in dynastic change, buried in forgotten papyrus scrolls that crumble to dust, and so it waits, a tomb without a king, a chamber without a body, a pyramid without a summit. The desert sighs over it, covering and uncovering its stones with each century. Jackals still wander near it. The stars still shine more fiercely above it. And the question remains, was it abandoned by men, or by eternity itself? The Unfinished Pyramid of Zawyet Ilarion stands as the strangest of all Egyptian monuments, not for what it holds, but for what it refuses to hold. In a land where memory was carved in stone, this one structure keeps its silence. It is a tomb that waits not for the dead, but for the living to wonder why. The crown that vanished in smoke. Along the misty banks of the river Nene, there lingers a story of splendor undone by water and time. It begins with a crown, not just any crown, but the coronation treasure of England's most infamous king, John, brother to Richard the Lionheart, villain of the Robin Hood tales, and bearer of a reign marked by rebellion, betrayal, and humiliation. The crown was his authority embodied, hammered in gold, set with stones gathered from crusades and plunder. It was not merely a decoration but a weapon of legitimacy. For in an age when kingship was contested, to wear the crown was to silence rivals, to display divine sanction, to cloak oneself in permanence. And yet, permanence proved fleeting. The crown of King John did not find its rest in a reliquary, nor in the vaults of Westminster, nor on the brow of his successors. It disappeared, swallowed by misfortune and mystery. The chronicles tell us only fragments, scattered like jewels in sand, that King John traveled across the marshes of East Anglia in the autumn of 1216, sick and desperate, pursued by enemies, his authority collapsing, and that somewhere between the wash of tidal flats and the reeds of the Nene estuary, his baggage train was lost. Among the wagons and crates were the royal regalia, including his crown. Whether through quicksand, rising waters, or human treachery, the treasure never emerged again. The river reclaimed it, the land refused to yield it back, and so the crown vanished into smoke. Not literal smoke of fire, but the smoke of history's uncertainty, the haze where fact and legend blur. King John's reign was one of unease. He was a monarch whose name became synonymous with tyranny, extortionate taxes, failed wars, conflicts with the Pope, and finally the forced signature of Magna Carta at Runnymede. By 1216, he was a king beleaguered, abandoned by many nobles, his power eroded by rebellion. When he marched east across the fens, he did so in poor health, perhaps poisoned, perhaps only weakened by dysentery. His enemies closed in. He needed safe passage, and yet even the roads betrayed him. The Wash, a wide tidal estuary, was treacherous at the best of times, its shifting sands and tides claiming careless travelers. John attempted the crossing with his royal baggage, his treasure, and his sacred regalia. The wagons lagged behind, heavy and slow. Some say the tide came in swifter than expected, swallowing the train. Others claim treacherous guides led it astray, knowing the sands would not bear its weight. In either case, the king's most precious objects were lost. When John himself reached the other side, he was said to be consumed with rage and despair. Within days, his sickness worsened. By October of 1216, he was dead at Newark Castle. The crown had vanished before its king. What was lost with it? Contemporary sources disagree. Some insist the entire treasury was carried into the estuary. Golden plates, silver goblets, the crown itself, relics and regalia used for coronations. Others believe only a portion was lost, and that some of the jewels were later quietly recovered or replaced. But the crown, the centerpiece of authority, was never seen again. Later monarchs had new crowns forged, yet whispers persisted that the original regalia of the Norman and Plantagenet kings lay buried beneath tidal mud, waiting. The Wash, with its vast tides and unsteady ground, became a grave for treasure. Fishermen spoke of glints in the sand. Peasants told tales of wagons emerging at low tide, only to sink again when approached. In the 17th century, rumors flared that workers dredging the area had uncovered fragments of gold, quickly hidden from tax collectors. But the crown itself never surfaced. The disappearance of John's crown is more than an anecdote. It marks a turning point in English history. For John died soon after, and with his death the Plantagenet dynasty shifted its course. Magna Carta, forced upon him by barons, would become the seed of constitutional law, though he had sought to annul it. His lost regalia became a symbol of his reign itself, heavy with pride, yet undone by fate. One can imagine the scene: wagons laden with iron-strapped chests, men struggling in mud that grew deeper with each step, horses panicking as the tide rushed in. Shouts, curses, the cracking of harnesses, the moment when the sea swallowed a fortune, and above it all, the crown of England sinking into darkness, never to be lifted again. Legends arose in the centuries that followed. Some said the crown had not been lost at all but spirited away, hidden by John himself in some secret stronghold. Others claimed the treasure was cursed, that no man could retrieve it without suffering the king's fate. There were whispers that monks from a nearby abbey had recovered part of it and concealed it within cloisters, passing it down in silence, yet no proof ever surfaced. Unlike other medieval treasures rediscovered in fields or plowed up by chance, the jewels of King John remained invisible. Their weight exists only in the chronicles, their glimmer only in imagination. What makes the story more haunting is the landscape itself. The Wash is not a gentle riverbank, but a shifting tidal wilderness where sea and land blur. Twice daily the tide advances and retreats, covering and uncovering miles of sand. To this day, it swallows the unwary. The royal baggage, once caught, would have been churned and buried beneath layers of silt. Even modern archaeologists, equipped with radar and sonar, have struggled to search the area. The sands move, erasing traces. The crown, if it remains, is likely entombed meters beneath mud and seawater. And yet, hope lingers. Treasure hunters still dream of finding the lost jewels of King John. Expeditions are sometimes mounted, maps consulted, calculations made of tides, as they stood in 1216. Each generation imagines itself the one to recover the crown. But the Wash keeps its silence. The crown's vanishing has become a metaphor. For some, it symbolizes the collapse of John's reign, the physical loss of regalia as a mirror to the political loss of authority. For others, it embodies the transience of power itself, how even kings may lose the symbols that make them divine. Imagine the crown now, not glittering in candlelight of a medieval hall, but resting in eternal darkness, sea creatures brushing against it, its gold dulled by centuries of salt. Perhaps jewels remain embedded in its frame. Perhaps they lie scattered, each stone a tiny spark extinguished beneath silt. It is a crown that exists in two worlds, in history, where it vanished, and in legend, where it waits. The chroniclers who recorded John's death gave little thought to the crown's fate. They were more concerned with the king's soul and with the succession of the boy Henry III. Yet in omitting the detail, they deepened the mystery. For if they did not recover it, and did not know where it lay, then its fate is forever uncertain. And so it becomes not just a story of one king's misfortune, but of absence itself. The absence of a crown, the absence of authority, the absence of certainty. To this day, when the tide recedes across the Wash and the sand glistens like metal in the light of dawn, one cannot help but wonder, does the crown still lie beneath, inches or miles away, unseen but present, its silence deeper than gold? Or has it dissolved entirely, reduced to fragments carried out to sea, scattered like smoke until no trace remains? The truth may never be known, but the mystery ensures that the crown of King John, vanished in water and remembered in legend, still wears a kind of power, not on a king's brow but in the imagination of all who hear its tale. It is the crown that vanished in smoke, and in doing so, it became eternal. The book that spoke without words. There are books that speak loudly through their language, their poetry, their history laid bare across vellum or papyrus. And then there are books that speak in silence, volumes that seem to communicate something vast, but refuse to reveal what it is. Among the strangest of these stands the Rohonc Codex, a manuscript shrouded in mystery, resting today, in Hungary, as impenetrable as the day it was found. It is small enough to hold in the hand, its pages humble, its binding unremarkable, but upon those 448 folios is written a script that no one has ever read. Not a single scholar, not even with centuries of progress in linguistics, cryptography, and computation, has cracked its meaning. The letters, if letters they are strange, flowing symbols, repeated in patterns that feel deliberate but refuse decipherment. Around these signs swirl hundreds of illustrations, scenes of battles, towers, processions, altars, stars, crosses, crescents, sunbursts. A whole world contained in ink, yet one whose voice is muffled beyond hearing. The Codex first surfaced in the early 19th century, donated to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences by a count named Gustav Batyan. Where he obtained it is uncertain. Whether it came from a monastery library, a noble collection, or a more secretive source, no one can say. Since then, it has sat quietly in archives, frustrating every attempt at interpretation. Scholars turned its pages and blinked. The script was not Latin, nor Greek, nor Hebrew, nor any familiar tongue. Some thought it resembled Brahmi or Devanagari, Indian scripts. Others compared it to the runic alphabets of early Europe. Still others insisted it must be a cipher, a code designed to conceal. Yet none of these paths bore fruit. The illustrations only deepened the confusion. On one page, a crucifixion scene, unmistakably Christian. On another, men bow before a crescent, suggesting Islam. Elsewhere, priests stand before what appear to be fire altars, recalling Zoroastrianism. A single manuscript containing all three faiths. Was this syncretism, imagination, or deception? The book seemed to weave together contradictions, binding religions that in the real world clashed. The battles, too, were strange. Soldiers wielded weapons that did not correspond cleanly to any period. Lances, bows, and banners of forms unfamiliar. In one image, horsemen clashed beneath a six-pointed star, its meaning uncertain. In another, ships sailed under skies studded with radiant discs. It was a book of everywhere and nowhere, of everyone and no one. Theories proliferated. Some claimed it was a prayer book of a forgotten sect, perhaps heretical, preserving its teachings in a script designed to protect it from enemies. Others said it was the work of a medieval monk, experimenting with a private cipher. A few suggested it was a hoax of the 18th or 19th century, invented to perplex scholars, but if it were a hoax, it was no ordinary one. The Rohonc Codex contains more than 87,000 individual symbols, written with consistency, repeating across pages in patterns too complex to be random. The symbols resemble an alphabet of over 200 unique characters, too many for a simple cipher alphabet, too few for meaningless scribbles. Their distribution follows statistical patterns akin to natural languages, yet when computers attempt to decode it, no known tongue aligns. It is as if the book records a language not of this earth, or one that has long since vanished without leaving any relatives behind. The Codex invites speculation about its origins. Some claim it dates to the 16th century, written on paper whose watermark has been traced to Venice. Others push it back earlier, to medieval Hungary, and there are those who whisper it could be far older, a relic carried across continents before history began to record. If one turns its pages slowly, the strangeness only deepens. The script runs in tight columns, neat, deliberate, as though the scribe worked with purpose. The ink fades in places but holds true in others, suggesting not hasty forgery but careful composition. The illustrations, drawn in brownish ink, are crude yet confident. They are not the work of a skilled illuminator, but neither are they childlike. They sit between worlds, precise enough to suggest meaning, rough enough to withhold it. In one image, a tree stretches across a page, and men gather beneath it with outstretched arms. In another, a city with battlements rises beside water, boats at its shore, and in another still, winged beings hover above men kneeling in prayer. It is a book of scenes, of stories clearly told, yet their language is forever lost. Cryptographers of the 19th and 20th centuries wrestled with the Codex. Some thought it must be written in a right-to-left script. Others insisted it was bostrophaedon, alternating direction with each line. Some found repetitions that looked like word endings, others patterns that resembled poetry, but none agreed. In the 20th century, Hungarian scholar Miklós Szakacs claimed the text was a chronicle of early Hungarians, encoded in an unknown alphabet. Later, Vilmos Hevesi proposed it was written in an obscure form of Brahmi, carried to Europe by travelers, but both were challenged and dismissed. Computational analysis in the 21st century confirmed what earlier scholars suspected. The Codex is not random. Its symbols follow laws of natural language, with distribution of words and structures matching human speech. Yet without a Rosetta Stone, without even a single phrase we can anchor, the text remains impenetrable. The book continues to speak, but not to us. There is something eerie in this silence. For a book is made to communicate, to carry voices from one mind to another. But the Rohonc Codex denies us this gift. It holds its knowledge tight, as though guarding a secret too dangerous or too sacred to be shared. Some imagine it contains a lost gospel, suppressed by church authorities. Others say it is a manual of forgotten science, astronomy encoded in pictures of stars and disks. Some believe it is a history of a people wiped from memory, their last testament written in symbols no one now understands. And a few even whisper that it was not meant for human eyes at all, but for beings elsewhere, written in a tongue unspoken by our kind. The possibilities expand with each turn of the page, but certainty never arrives. The Codex sits today, in Budapest, preserved but little examined. Few are allowed to handle it. Digital scans exist, and they too perplex modern readers. Online, communities of amateur codebreakers pour over its pages, each proposing solutions: Hungarian, Old Romanian, Sanskrit, artificial cipher, even alien language. None convince. The Codex resists them all. It is a book that has lasted through centuries, surviving wars, empires, and revolutions. Empires that ruled Hungary have fallen, yet the manuscript remains, its voice unbroken. In its endurance, it mocks the fragility of kings and nations. Imagine for a moment the unknown scribe who made it. Sitting in a candle-lit room, dipping quill into ink, scratching out symbol after symbol, page after page. What compelled him? Was he a monk recording holy mysteries? A scholar encoding secrets? A dreamer creating a world of his own? Did he believe someone, someday, would read it? Or did he write it knowing no one could? Perhaps the Codex was less a book than a labyrinth, a puzzle meant not to be solved but to be entered. To turn its pages is to wander through his mind, where each word is a door that leads nowhere, each picture a window onto a land no map has ever shown. The Rohonc Codex is not alone in its strangeness. The Voynich manuscript, discovered in Italy, bears similar mysteries: unreadable text, fantastical drawings, stubborn refusal to yield meaning. Yet the Rohonc differs. Where the Voynich drifts toward the botanical and the strange, the Rohonc remains anchored in history, battles, altars, crucifixions. It feels almost decipherable, yet remains out of reach. Perhaps that is its power, for a solved riddle becomes mere history, an unsolved one remains alive. The Rohonc Codex continues to provoke imagination because it continues to resist knowledge. It reminds us that human understanding is limited, that there remain books which defy our languages and logics. Picture the manuscript resting in its quiet case, the air of the archive thick with silence. Around it, rows of books that scholars can read, lines of history clear and comprehensible. And in the center, this one book, closed, unread, unspeaking. Yet somehow it is louder than all the rest. It is a book that spoke without words and continues to speak without them still. It speaks in mystery, in defiance, in the stubborn endurance of secrets. It speaks not to our reason, but to our wonder, and perhaps that is enough. For not all voices need to be understood to be heard. Some are meant to remain echoes in the dark, drawing us closer, reminding us that even in an age of satellites and supercomputers, there are still whispers we cannot catch. The Rohonc Codex is one of them, and until it yields, it will remain less a book than a mirror, reflecting not its own truth but our hunger for truth, our yearning to know, our unease with silence. It is the book that spoke without words, and in its silence it may speak forever. The sword that waited for a hand. There are objects in human history that seem to exist more in legend than in reality, carried by whispers and held in the fragile balance between myth and truth. Among them is a blade said to be born not of smiths but of gods, a weapon that did not pass from furnace to scabbard, but from the maw of a dragon to the hand of a hero. This is the story of Kusanagi-no-Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, a relic said to embody both the breath of storms and the weight of divine authority in Japan. For centuries, its presence has shaped battles, enthroned emperors, and filled chronicles with awe. Yet it remains elusive, unseen, hidden, and waiting. Whether it exists in steel, in spirit, or in memory alone, it has always been a sword that waits for a hand worthy of wielding it. The tale begins with the god Susanoo, the tempestuous deity of storms, brother to Amaterasu, the sun goddess, who withdrew her radiance from the heavens when angered by his reckless destruction. Cast out of the heavenly realm, Susanoo wandered to the earthly plane, where he encountered grief in the shape of a weeping family. A monstrous serpent, Yamata no Orochi, with 8 heads and 8 tails, had been devouring their daughters year after year. Only one remained, trembling with fate at her side. Susanoo, seeking redemption and purpose, devised a plan. He brewed sake strong enough to daze a god, poured it into 8 vats, and lured the beast. As the serpent drank and fell into stupor, Susanoo struck, slicing through its necks with his blade. But within one of the severed tails, something struck his weapon. A sound like steel on stone. Splitting the tail open, Susanoo discovered a sword, unlike any made by mortal hands. He lifted it, recognizing at once its divine origin. This was the blade later known as Kusanagi-no-Tsurugi. Susanoo, understanding its power, sent it as an offering of peace to his estranged sister Amaterasu. In doing so, he mended his bond with her, and the sword passed into the hands of the heavenly lineage. The sword story did not end in myth, but bled into the chronicles of Japan's rulers. It became one of the 3 sacred treasures of Japan, alongside the Yada no Kagami mirror and the Yasakani no Magatama jewel. These were not simply objects but symbols of divine legitimacy, bestowed upon emperors as proof of their descent from the gods. Kusanagi was not wielded on the battlefield, but kept as a talisman of sovereignty, its presence alone legitimizing rule. The sword's very name carried a legend within it, the tale of Prince Yamato Takeru. The prince, disguised and exiled by his own father, found himself in peril when enemies lured him into tall grass and set it aflame, hoping the fire would consume him. Armed with the sacred sword, he cut down the grass to clear a path. But the blade revealed another power. When swung, it could summon the wind itself. The flames reversed, driving into his foes, saving the prince from death. From this moment, the sword was called Kusanagi-no-Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword. It became not only a divine relic, but a living force, capable of bending the natural world, and yet, even with such tales, the sword remained hidden from mortal eyes. Unlike swords displayed in palaces or shrines, Kusanagi was kept in secret, said to rest at Atsuta Shrine in Nagoya for centuries. No ordinary person, not even emperors, were permitted to gaze upon it. The sword existed not as an artifact to be admired, but as a presence, cloaked in ritual, glimpsed only in the imagination. This secrecy fed doubt and reverence alike. Did the sword truly exist in steel, or was it an idea made tangible through tradition? Was it replaced, lost, or destroyed, its memory carried forward by reverence alone? One of the most enduring mysteries surrounding Kusanagi comes from the 12th century, during the Battle of Dan no Ura. In this naval clash, the Minamoto clan faced the Taira, who carried the child Emperor Antoku along with the imperial regalia. Defeated, the Taira attempted to prevent their enemies from claiming the sacred treasures. According to accounts, the grandmother of Antoku, holding the regalia, leapt into the sea with the boy emperor in her arms. The mirror and jewel were recovered, but the sword was said to have been lost beneath the waves. Yet later chronicles insisted the sword remained, hidden in the imperial collection. Some suggested what was lost was a replica, while the true Kusanagi had never left the shrine. Others believed the sword sank to the ocean floor, lying still in the dark, unseen for centuries. The truth has never been revealed. The secrecy surrounding the imperial regalia means few, if any, living souls have ever seen the blade. Even during imperial enthronements, the treasures are wrapped, presented but never unveiled. The priests and attendants themselves are sworn to silence, and so the sword remains a presence without proof, an object of belief that resists exposure. Legends whisper that the sword carries a spirit of its own. Some claim it embodies the storm that birthed it, restless and potent, unwilling to be wielded by hands unworthy. Others believe it guards Japan itself, its unseen presence ensuring the balance between the divine and the human. The fact that it is unseen may itself be its power, a relic that is more than steel, a story that binds a nation. Archaeologists and historians remain divided. Some doubt the sword exists at all, suggesting it may have been a symbolic object, replaced over centuries to maintain the continuity of myth. Others argue that whether physical or not, its significance lies in its endurance. It has survived in memory for over a millennium, shaping identity and belief. The absence of the sword from public view does not diminish its weight, it magnifies it. What is hidden grows powerful, and what is unseen becomes untouchable. When one considers the history of Japan, its wars, its emperors, its transformations, the silent endurance of Kusanagi becomes striking. Empires fell, castles burned, new powers rose. Yet the sword remains in the chronicles, waiting. It has become not merely an artifact but a reflection of an eternal promise, that divine order still underlies the world of men. And so, the sword waits still. Whether beneath the sea, within the shrine, or only in the stories of the people, Kusanagi-no-Tsurugi endures as both weapon and whisper. A blade drawn from a serpent's tail, a gift of gods, a savior in fire, a treasure unseen. Perhaps it does not need to be revealed, for its strength lies not in steel but in belief. It is a sword that does not cut flesh but binds time, a relic that refuses to vanish, and a symbol that waits patiently, endlessly, for the hand that might one day claim it. The book that spoke without words. There are books that tell stories with clear sentences, lines that stretch from beginning to end with meaning easily gathered. Then there are books that speak in silence, where each page is filled with signs that look like writing, but refuse to share their voice. One such volume has puzzled scholars, priests, linguists, and dreamers for centuries. A book bound in faded leather, its ink still dark, its pages still firm, a book that resists being read, no matter how long one studies it. The Rohonc Codex is one of the most baffling manuscripts ever discovered in Europe. Named after the small town of Rohonc, now Recknitz, in modern-day Austria, it emerged in the 19th century from obscurity. In 1838, Count Gustav Batian donated a collection of old books to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Among them was a strange volume no one could make sense of. It was soon set apart from the others, for while the rest contained familiar letters, maps, or images, this one was filled with a script unknown to any language, an alphabet that appeared both familiar and alien, scattered across almost 450 pages. At first glance, the book looks ordinary, like a prayer book or chronicle. The script flows evenly, line after line, giving the impression of meaningful text, yet no scholar has ever managed to translate it. The letters, if they are letters, number more than 200 distinct signs. That is far more than most alphabets, which usually contain fewer than 40. Even syllabaries, which represent sounds in blocks, rarely exceed 100 signs. The codex has so many that no one has agreed on whether it is an alphabet, syllabary, logographic system, or something else entirely. The text is written from right to left, unlike most European languages but similar to Hebrew or Arabic. This gave early scholars hope that it might be an unknown script related to the Middle East. Others suspected it could be some secret code, perhaps invented by a religious sect. But with no key, no parallel text, no Rosetta Stone to compare it with, the pages remain locked. Adding to the mystery are the illustrations. Sprinkled throughout the codex are crude drawings, almost childlike, yet unmistakably symbolic. There are scenes of battle, with soldiers carrying swords, spears, and banners. There are depictions of cities, castles, and temples. There are religious images, crucifixions, altars, men and women kneeling in prayer. In one scene, 12 men gather around a table. In another, crowds seem to listen to a preacher. Some illustrations show suns, moons, and stars, suggesting cosmology or calendars. Others show what may be rivers or ladders reaching upward. Taken together, the images suggest the codex might be a religious manuscript, perhaps an apocryphal gospel, a heretical book, or a chronicle of some unknown sect. Yet none of this can be proven, for without the words, the meaning of the pictures is uncertain. Over the centuries, many theories have been offered. Some claim the codex was written in an ancient form of Hungarian, disguised in a strange alphabet. Others proposed that it is in early Romanian, or even Romani, written phonetically with invented characters. A few suggested it might be Brahmi or a derivative of South Asian scripts, somehow carried to Europe. Others argued it could be a Slavic liturgical text, encrypted to protect it from persecution. Yet all attempts at translation end in frustration. Scholars who claim to have solved the script inevitably contradict one another. In the 19th and 20th centuries, at least half a dozen supposed decipherments were published. One researcher insisted it was a form of Old Hungarian prayer book. Another claimed it was a chronicle of the Crusades. Another declared it contained sermons and psalms. But when their methods were tested, none held up to scrutiny. Patterns collapsed, words failed to align, and the so-called solutions dissolved. This endless cycle of hope and disappointment has led some to suspect the book might be a hoax. Perhaps it was created deliberately as a forgery, to deceive the Bathyany family, or impress collectors. After all, in the 18th and 19th centuries, antiquarian forgeries were not uncommon. Wealthy patrons often prized exotic manuscripts, and some were willing to pay dearly. Could the codex be nothing more than inked nonsense, a fabrication meant to look profound? If so, it is an astonishingly consistent hoax. The handwriting flows smoothly across hundreds of pages, with few errors or corrections. The symbols repeat with statistical regularity, as if obeying real linguistic rules. The drawings, too, are placed with care, matching the themes of the surrounding text. To produce a hoax of this length and detail would have required immense effort, for little gain. And strangely, there is no known attempt to sell or exploit the codex. It simply appeared in the Bathyany library, waiting. Even modern computers have not unlocked it. Cryptographers have analyzed the text, counting frequencies, searching for hidden codes. Some patterns emerge, certain signs cluster together, others repeat at intervals, some occur only in specific contexts. It behaves like language, yet it has resisted decryption, refusing to yield meaning. If it is nonsense, it is structured nonsense. If it is language, it may be one we have never seen before. The physical book itself deepens the puzzle. Its paper has been dated to the 16th century, though the exact dating is uncertain. Some suggest it may be earlier, perhaps late medieval. The ink and pigments match those used in Europe, yet the style of script is unlike any known tradition. Bound in simple leather, worn by time, the volume seems humble, and yet what it contains is anything but. The codex carries with it an unsettling feeling. To open it is to enter a room where voices murmur, but never clarify. The text suggests speech, but no word emerges. The images suggest stories, but no plot unfolds. It is a book that seems alive, but mute, filled with meanings that hang just beyond reach. One scholar described reading it as being in the presence of language itself, stripped of comprehension. Another said it was like watching the lips of someone moving in a dream. You know they are speaking, but the sound never comes. Could it be that the codex was not meant to be read by ordinary eyes at all? Some theorists suggest it was a ritual book, where the symbols carried meaning only for initiates. Others think it may be an attempt at universal writing, an effort to invent a script that could capture meaning beyond words, a symbolic language lost to history. Perhaps it was never about the words at all, but the act of writing itself, a sacred gesture embodied in ink. The Rohonc Codex has become a mirror for human imagination. Each generation sees in it what they seek: a gospel, a chronicle, a code, or a trick. For Hungarians, it sometimes symbolizes a lost national text. For mystics, it represents hidden wisdom. For skeptics, it stands as a warning against chasing illusions. And yet it continues to compel. The more one looks at its pages, the more one longs to understand, and so the book waits. It waits in the library of the Hungarian Academy, preserved but rarely shown. It waits for the linguist who might one day see the pattern no one else has seen. It waits for the believer who insists it holds a lost gospel. It waits for the skeptic, who shakes their head but cannot look away. It waits in silence, its words unspoken, its meaning unwritten. Perhaps its greatest secret is that it reminds us of how fragile knowledge can be. Writing, after all, is a pact between symbol and sound, page and mind. If one half of that pact is lost, meaning vanishes. A book becomes a shadow of itself, a body without a voice. The Rohonc Codex may be the purest embodiment of this truth, a book that exists, yet does not speak. And in that silence lies its power, for sometimes what cannot be read speaks the loudest of all. The statue that smiled in ash. In the ancient seaside town of Herculaneum, nestled at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, people once lived ordinary lives. Fishermen cast nets into the dark Mediterranean waters. Merchants laid out amphorae of wine, oil, and garum, the pungent fish sauce prized across the empire. Children ran barefoot across mosaic floors, their laughter echoing through narrow stone alleys. At dusk, oil lamps glowed in the atriums of villas, their flickering light dancing against painted walls that showed gods, heroes, and banquets. Yet all of this was erased in a single day. In 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius awoke with fury. Its roar thundered across the Bay of Naples, and from its mouth came fire, stone, and ash. Within hours, Herculaneum and its sister city Pompeii were buried, sealed beneath layers of volcanic matter that hardened into tombs of stone. Beneath that crushing silence, people, homes, animals, and statues froze in time. Among the ruins, archaeologists would one day find a strange figure. It was not a grand marble colossus or a delicate bronze hero. It was small, humble, and charred. Yet it carried with it a mystery, for this statue seemed to smile, its lips caught in a gentle curve, as if it had endured the fire and ash with quiet acceptance. They called it the volcanic victim figurine, a name that suggests both art and tragedy, both sculpture and body. At first, no one could be certain whether the statue was truly a work of human hands or the hardened imprint of a victim, sculpted by nature itself. The eruption at Herculaneum was different from Pompeii's. While Pompeii was buried in ash and pumice, Herculaneum was engulfed by superheated surges of volcanic material, a mixture of gas, ash, and molten fragments known as pyroclastic flows. These moved at speeds faster than a galloping horse, and reached temperatures of over 500 degrees Celsius. Flesh, bone, and wood were carbonized instantly, reduced to brittle shadows, yet preserved in form. Whole beams of houses, entire loaves of bread, even scrolls and libraries were found blackened, intact but unreadable. It is within this terrible furnace that the smiling figure was created. Some believe it was a wooden statue of a household god, carbonized but still recognizable. Others suggest it was a figurine held in someone's hand as they fled, transformed by fire into a relic of last moments. And some whisper that it was not carved at all, that it was the impression of a person themselves, caught by the ash, their final expression strangely serene. The figurine was discovered not in isolation but among layers of devastation. Excavators in the 18th century digging tunnels into Herculaneum recorded statues, mosaics, frescoes, and countless objects emerging from hardened lava-like deposits. Many artifacts were carried off to the Bourbon royal collections, destined for palaces and hidden cabinets. The smiling figure, too, was catalogued, though its ambiguous form ensured it remained more curiosity than masterpiece. Yet as the centuries passed, the statue drew attention precisely because it defied certainty. Scholars examined it, debating whether its grin was intentional or accidental, sculpted by artisans or by fire. The curve of its mouth became the subject of fascination. Could the heat of Vesuvius have twisted features into something resembling a smile? Could molten ash have hardened at just the right moment, preserving a fleeting expression? Or had the sculptor centuries before carved that smile deliberately, never knowing it would one day outlast the city itself? In Herculaneum, statues had special meaning. Families often kept small figures in household shrines, the Leraria, where they honored guardian spirits, gods of the hearth, and ancestors. These figurines were not mere decorations, they were companions in daily ritual, protectors of doorways, givers of luck. A family might light incense or pour wine before them, asking for safety at sea or health for children. If the smiling figurine had been such a household god, then perhaps its expression of calm was meant to reassure the living, even as the world outside burned. But the possibility remains that the figurine is not art at all, but accident. In recent decades, scientists studying Herculaneum have uncovered carbonized skeletons in boathouses along the ancient shoreline. Hundreds of people once crowded there, hoping to escape by sea. Many perished instantly when the pyroclastic surge struck. Their bodies, subjected to extreme heat, left strange traces. Bones cracked and blackened, skulls sometimes shattered, soft tissue vaporized. Could the figurine have been born from such a moment? The fire sculpting ash around a human form, hardening it into something that appeared carved? If so, then the smile might be nothing more than the frozen tension of death. And yet the mystery deepens, for in the cultural memory of the eruption, certain figures became symbolic. Pompeii gave us the plaster casts of fleeing citizens, their faces twisted in fear. Herculaneum gave us libraries of scrolls, blackened but preserved, and the smiling figurine, whether statue or victim, stands as Herculaneum's riddle, a reminder that not all traces can be neatly explained. Archaeologists, historians, and even psychologists have pondered its meaning. Some see the smile as ironic, a cruel joke of fate, mocking human fragility. Others see it as comforting, a symbol that even in catastrophe peace can be found. A few suggest it carries religious overtones, recalling the serene expressions of saints, martyrs or Buddhas, who face suffering with transcendence. The truth may never be known, but the figurine continues to invite reflection. Imagine standing in the ruins of Herculaneum today. The air is heavy with the scent of earth and salt from the nearby sea. You walk past mosaics showing Neptune and Venus, past frescoes painted in red and gold, past carbonized wooden beams that crumble at a touch. Then, in a small glass case you see it, the blackened figure, small enough to hold, its lips curved faintly upward. Its surface is rough, fractured, fragile, yet the expression is undeniable. In that moment, you feel the centuries collapse. The eruption is no longer distant history but a presence before you, smiling quietly through the ash. The figurine raises questions that stretch beyond archaeology. It makes us wonder about the relationship between art and accident, between life and death, between memory and oblivion. Was the smile intended, or is it our own projection, desperate to find meaning in chaos? Did the fire that destroyed a city also create a relic of strange beauty? Can tragedy and serenity coexist in a single expression? The people of Herculaneum did not choose their fate, but through this enigmatic figure, they left behind something more haunting than any monument. Not the grandeur of marble temples, not the power of emperors, but a quiet smile, small and human. A reminder that even in the shadow of catastrophe, something of us endures, and sometimes it endures with gentleness. The statue that smiled in ash remains one of history's strangest relics. Neither holy statue nor holy victim, neither entirely art nor entirely accident. A presence suspended between categories, as mysterious as the city that still sleeps beneath Vesuvius. To look at it is to see both survival and destruction, both comfort and terror. It is to see a city's last breath, crystallized in a smile. And so it waits, silent but expressive. A smile carved by hands we cannot name, or by fire we cannot command. A smile that has traveled across nearly 2,000 years, through ruin and rediscovery, through doubt and fascination. The smile of Herculaneum, still lingering in ash. The tower that forgot its builders. On the rugged, wind-bent island of Sardinia, rising from hills that roll toward the sea, stand ancient towers of stone, silent, immovable, and older than the memory of nations. They are called Nuraghe, fortresses, sanctuaries, or something stranger still, and though more than 7,000 of them dot the landscape, no one can say with certainty who built them, why they were raised, or what purpose they served. Their builders left no written words, no records carved in clay or scratched in stone. The towers endure, but their voices are gone, and so they wait, weathered into the earth itself, like guardians of an age the world has forgotten. Imagine yourself on that island. The Mediterranean sun presses down, hot and steady, the kind of warmth that makes the horizon waver. The grass is dry and golden, bending in a restless wind. Sheep wander lazily across hillsides, their bells ringing soft notes into the air. And there, just ahead, a mound of rough dark stone rises like a broken tooth from the earth. At first glance, it looks like a ruined wall, a pile of boulders left behind by some colossal hand. But as you approach, the pattern becomes clear. The stones are placed with care, layered in circles climbing upward toward the sky. You are standing at the base of a Nuraghe. Each of these towers was built with stones so massive they seem impossible for human hands to lift. Some weigh several tons, yet they were carried, shaped, and stacked without mortar, balanced with a precision that has lasted for more than 3,000 years. Step closer, and you find a narrow entrance, a low, shadowed passage leading into the cool dark. Inside, the air shifts, the world outside fades. You are in the hollow heart of the tower, where chambers open like caves, their ceilings corbelled in domes of stone. Light filters through tiny windows, narrow as spear slits, and the silence is thick, broken only by the faint sound of your own breath. Who built these? The question lingers like the echo of footsteps. Archaeologists tell us they were raised in the Bronze Age, between 1900 and 730 BCE, by a people we now call the Nuraghic civilization. But beyond that, little is certain. No books, no names, no stories survive. These builders are shadows in history, known only through stone. Some say the towers were fortresses, built to guard families or clans against enemies. Others suggest they were temples, places where rituals unfolded in the flicker of firelight. Still others think of them as gathering halls, centers of power where chiefs or kings once ruled. The truth may be all of these, or something entirely different, hidden forever in time. Step outside again, into the wide open light, and imagine the world as it was when these towers were alive. Sardinia was not the quiet island you see today. It was alive with people, villages clustered around the stone towers, fires burning at night, smoke rising against the stars. Livestock grazed the hills, while bronze tools glinted in the sun. Traded across the Mediterranean with Mycenae, with Cyprus, with Egypt itself. Ships came and went, their sails white against the endless blue, carrying goods, stories, and secrets. And always above it all, the Nuraghe stood, watching, waiting. Some towers are simple, single structures with one chamber, rising like a solid cone of stone. Others are vast complexes, with multiple towers linked by thick walls, encircling courtyards and hidden passageways. The most famous of these is Su Nuraghe, near the town of Barumini, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Walk its corridors, and you find yourself in a labyrinth, spiral staircases curling upward, walls thicker than a man is tall, secret chambers tucked deep within. It feels defensive, like a fortress, yet it also feels ceremonial, as if something sacred once unfolded within those walls. Archaeologists have found pottery, weapons, and figurines in these sites, clues scattered like breadcrumbs. Small bronze statues depict warriors with shields, archers with drawn bows, figures of women and animals. They tell us that this was a people who fought, who prayed, who lived with art and with war. But the statues are silent on the greatest question: why the towers? Why build so many, covering nearly every part of the island with such effort and care? Some theories whisper of astronomy. Perhaps the towers were aligned with the stars, marking solstices, charting the sky. Others speak of power, the towers as symbols, not merely of protection but of authority, raised high to show the strength of a clan. And still others suggest something stranger, that these were not only human places, but sacred centers, meant to bridge earth and spirit, where offerings were made to gods now forgotten. Imagine the people gathering there. A feast at dusk, torches burning as the sun sank. Music, drums, pipes, voices, echoing against the stone. The smell of roasted meat in the air, mingling with smoke. Warriors standing guard at the tower's entrance, their bronze blades gleaming, and inside, in the shadowed chamber, a ritual. Perhaps a prayer to the sky, to the sea, to the spirits of the stone itself. The tower breathing with life, but time moved forward, and the Nuraghic people faded. By the time Rome spread its hand across the Mediterranean, the towers were already ancient, their builders forgotten. The Romans wrote of Sardinia, but even they did not know who had raised the stone giants. The towers stood as ruins even then, silent and impenetrable. Centuries rolled on. Byzantines, Vandals, Spanish kings, Italian unification, and still, the towers endured. Farmers built fields around them, shepherds used them for shelter, children climbed their walls, and yet, no one could explain them. Even now, the mystery endures. More than 7,000 towers remain, scattered across Sardinia, like a constellation mapped on land. Each one is slightly different, shaped by the hands of its builders, but together they tell the same story, of a people whose greatest monument was not words, not empires, but stone. Stand before one at sunset. The light catches the rough surfaces, turning them gold and red, as if the tower itself were glowing. The sea lies beyond, blue fading into silver. The wind carries the smell of salt, the distant call of birds. You place your hand on the stone, cool and rough beneath your fingers, and you wonder what memory lies inside. The builders are gone, their voices lost, but the tower remains, heavy with silence, waiting for someone to listen. Some say the Nuraghe are tombs, holding the spirits of the dead. Others believe they are symbols of rebirth, their circular chambers echoing the shape of wombs, of cycles, of eternity. And some believe they are simply what they appear to be, strongholds, the bones of a people determined to leave their mark. But none of these answers satisfy. The towers resist explanation. They are puzzles without keys. Perhaps that is their true purpose. Not to tell us something, but to remind us of how much we do not know. To stand in defiance of time, refusing to yield their secrets. The tower does not explain. It does not remember names. It simply exists. Solid, enduring, eternal. A monument to mystery itself. And as the stars rise above Sardinia, one by one, cold and brilliant in the night sky, the towers are still there. Dark shapes against the horizon, older than history, older than the nations that claim them. They belong not to us, but to the earth, to the wind, to the memory of those who built them and vanished without leaving a word. The Nuraghe are the towers that forgot their builders. and yet, by forgetting, they remain unforgettable. The staff that walked without feet. They say some objects never truly rest, never remain bound by the soil that hides them, nor the glass cases that later try to contain them. Some objects are spoken into being, not only through the labor of the hands that shape them, but through the weight of belief, through stories that refuse to fade even when centuries fall away. Among these, perhaps none carries so much silence, so much untold weight, as the staff said to have walked without feet. The staff linked to Moses, whose echoes linger like the salt wind that brushes the cliffs above the Dead Sea. When whispers first began, they did not begin in laboratories, nor even in the ink-stained halls of scholarship, but on the lips of wanderers who walked where desert gives way to stone, where caverns stretch like veins beneath the dry earth. Some say it was within caves near Qumran, where fragile scrolls lined in fading Hebrew script had once waited in jars sealed against time, that hints of a staff were noted. Not in full, not as a relic laid bare, but as fragments of description, phrases that glowed like sparks within text. A rod that bloomed, one phrase suggested. A rod that led without moving, another hinted. But the most curious of all, written faintly, as though the scribe's hand trembled, spoke of a rod that walked without feet. Such a phrase might seem metaphorical, something of parable or poetry, but the Dead Sea is a place where the boundary between the symbolic and the real is never entirely firm. Here even stone feels heavy with metaphor. Archaeologists who followed these hints did not expect discovery. They expected disappointment, another echo without substance, another story written in dust. Yet still they searched, for the desert is as much an archive as any library. Within its silence, preservation lingers. What is left untouched by moisture and time sometimes survives longer than the civilizations that once gave it meaning. In one shallow chamber, lit only by the thin light of lamps and the quicksilver reflection of the Dead Sea through fissures in rock, fragments of wood were noted, not grand, not whole, but marked by something strange. The surface did not crack the way dead wood usually does. It seemed hardened, almost metallic, its grain blackened not by fire but by age beyond reckoning. To hold it was to feel a pulse, not literal, not something you could measure, but something that suggested weight beyond material. Some said it was cedar, others tamarisk, others acacia, for all three trees had been sacred in ancient lands. But what mattered more than the identification of wood was the pattern of the stories that sprang up the moment the fragments were described. For the fragments aligned too neatly with a tradition already known, the staff of Moses, a staff said to split seas, to summon water from stone, to transform into a serpent before the eyes of a pharaoh. Could these pieces be of that same staff? Could the object that once commanded the Red Sea still whisper beneath desert stone? Skepticism came quickly. It always does. Some argued that any wood left in such conditions could not have survived from the 2nd millennium BCE, when the Exodus traditions were said to take place. Others insisted the connection was too convenient, that relics of Moses would never lie so near Qumran where Essens lived, where scrolls preserved sectarian rules but spoke not of Egyptian plagues or parted seas. And yet the staff remained, even when lifted out of the earth, its presence unnerved. Conservators spoke of difficulty in handling it, not because it crumbled, but because it resisted. It felt heavy for its size, weighted as though stone had mingled with its veins. Light shimmered differently upon it, as if refusing to decide whether to reflect wood or mineral. And most strangely, some swore they felt vibration when their fingers traced its grooves. It was not mechanical, not measurable, yet real enough that hardened scholars withdrew their touch, unsettled by sensation. Legends rushed to fill the silence. One story claimed that the staff had not been made by human hand at all, but had been born of creation itself, placed in Adam's keeping, passed down through generations until Moses carried it. Another claimed that it was one of the 10 things shaped at twilight on the eve of the first Sabbath, when boundaries between natural and supernatural blurred. The Dead Sea people themselves, had they known of such an object, might not have doubted such legends. To them, the desert was already a place of testing, of divine presence, of the struggle between light and shadow. A staff that walked without feet would not be out of place in their worldview. But the walking, what did it mean? Some suggest it was metaphor, that the staff walked in the sense of guiding people, of moving them without movement. Others suggest a stranger thought, that the staff itself bore will, that it crossed landscapes unseen, appearing where it was needed, refusing to remain where it was not. Such an idea recalls the way it appears suddenly in Scripture, at Moses' hand when confronting Pharaoh, then again when striking stone, then again when lifted above waters. The text never says where it is kept in between. It simply is there when required. Archaeology, of course, does not deal in such mysteries. It deals in stratigraphy, in carbon dating, in measurements precise and cold. Samples were taken from the Dead Sea fragments, tests conducted. Results were inconsistent. Some suggested an age of 2,000 years, others perhaps 3,000, but contamination blurred precision, as always happens with objects handled too many times. The fragments resisted neat categorization, and so they passed into storage. But storage did not silence their legend, because the story was already larger than the wood. Travelers spoke of it, pilgrims came to ask whether the staff still struck stone to give water, and in the minds of those who had touched it, the vibration lingered. One scholar described a dream in which he saw the staff not lying in glass, but standing upright, pressing its shadow like a pillar into sand. Another spoke of hearing the faintest crack, like splitting wood, in the quiet of the archive where the staff was kept, yet no fracture appeared. Perhaps the strangest thing was the way the fragments never seemed quite still, not literally moving, not in any way measurable, yet each time they were revisited, observers swore the arrangement seemed different, a curve more pronounced, a grain shifted, as though the staff remembered its form, slowly drawing itself whole again. The desert winds outside Qumran carry many sounds, the howl of storms, the hush of shifting grains of salt, the groan of rock expanding beneath the sun. But those who linger long enough begin to hear another sound beneath it all, like the rhythm of steps, not human, not animal, but steady, as though something long ago began walking and never quite stopped. And the question rises, was the staff of Moses truly recovered, or was it only ever glimpsed, half revealed, because something within it refuses to be bound, refuses to rest? For a staff that once commanded waters, once defied kings, once split stone, why would it ever lie silent? Why would it not still walk, without feet, across the deserts that first shaped its legend? The fragments of the staff had been catalogued, preserved in jars and cases, studied under magnifying lenses and ultraviolet light. Scholars debated its wood, its age, its possible magical provenance, yet none could reconcile the tension between science and story, between material evidence and whispered tradition. Some nights, those same scholars claimed, the air around the fragments seemed charged, as if some latent energy waited patiently, watching for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Stories grew, as they always do. Pilgrims, researchers, wanderers, even the occasional skeptic, reported the same subtle anomaly, a feeling that the staff had not yet settled into time, that it was capable of movement, slow and deliberate, across spaces not marked on maps. This movement was not visible, but it was sensed, a faint tug at the edge of perception, as though the staff remembered the steps of its past owners, the hands that had gripped it, the water it had commanded, the serpents it had become. In manuscripts found alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls, hints of an earlier hidden narrative suggested that the staff had been fashioned with a sacred geometry, carved not only for strength but to channel unseen forces. Every notch and groove might have corresponded to celestial alignments, seasonal cycles, or the rhythms of the river and desert. Some scholars propose that the staff had once been a key, not merely a tool for miracles, but a device capable of measuring, unlocking, or guiding something beyond human understanding. Yet even as speculation soared, the physical truth remained stubbornly opaque. Radiocarbon dating gave only a window of centuries, a span too wide to confirm a connection to the biblical narrative of Moses. Microscopic analysis revealed resins and mineral deposits, some consistent with Middle Eastern soils, others inexplicably foreign. How did these elements converge in a single artifact? Some argued contamination, others whispered intervention, deliberate, subtle, something orchestrated by hands invisible to history. Travelers spoke of encounters with the staff that seemed almost dreamlike. A Bedouin merchant once recounted that, while traversing the salt flats near the Dead Sea, he saw a slender rod leaning against a rock. When he approached, it vanished, leaving only the impression of warmth against the sand, and a faint hum that lingered long after his vision cleared. Another story, retold in hushed tones at an archaeological symposium, described the staff appearing in a scholar's study, resting upon a table exactly where he had imagined it in a dream, only to vanish by morning. Such accounts were dismissed by rational minds, yet rationality seemed insufficient to explain the staff's peculiar nature. It was as if the staff possessed a memory of movement, a knowledge of the spaces it had crossed, and an insistence on continuing its journey. If true, what did it seek? Did it walk because it had unfinished business, or because it carried within it some imperative from the forces that had shaped it in the first place? The staff's connection to Moses was more than symbolic. Texts from later centuries described a rod that could summon water, split seas, and command serpents. These narratives suggested that the staff's power was intimately tied to the flow of life itself, to the waters, to the earth, to the sky. The Dead Sea fragments hinted at something similar. Under certain light, the wood's surface appeared almost iridescent, shifting in tone as though reflecting some hidden pattern. Shadows danced along its grooves, evoking imagery of rivers, waves, and winding paths. Some scholars, trained in observation but untrained in legend, confessed to feeling vertigo when studying it, a a sense of being pulled into the story the staff carried. A particularly compelling clue came from microscopic carvings, almost invisible to the naked eye. These minute etchings suggested an intentional encoding, a map, a sequence, a record. It was as if the staff contained a chronicle of events, not in written language, but in structure and form, a silent testament to the epochs it had witnessed. Researchers attempting to decode it noted recurring geometric motifs that aligned with lunar phases, solar solstices, and the positions of celestial bodies visible from ancient Israel and Egypt. Each alignment seemed deliberate, intentional, a message waiting to be understood. The staff's travels, of course, could not be fully reconstructed. Legend suggested that it had been carried across deserts, through courts of pharaohs, across seas, and finally hidden in the caves near Qumran to preserve its power. Some stories implied it had been a staff of guidance, appearing to those in need, vanishing from those who might misuse it. Its movements were selective, deliberate, and though it had been contained in modern jars and display cases, whispers persisted that containment was temporary, a pause in a journey that stretched beyond human comprehension. The more the staff was studied, the more its mystery deepened. Scholars attempted digital reconstructions, imagining the complete staff based on fragments. Each reconstruction seemed incomplete, yet each suggested something extraordinary, a continuity of form that defied ordinary decay, a resilience that implied purpose, perhaps even consciousness. Some noted that light passing across the reconstructed image created fleeting reflections resembling footprints, as though the staff itself was tracing its own history through shadow. And then there were the dreams. Individuals who spent hours in proximity to the staff often described visions crossing seas, standing atop cliffs, parting waters, commanding serpents. These visions were not identical, yet shared a common pattern, a journey guided by a rod that moved without feet, an instrument of authority and protection, a bridge between mortal and divine realms. The visions were disconcerting, sometimes terrifying, yet always filled with a sense of inevitability, as though the staff's purpose was unfolding on a scale far beyond individual lifetimes. Legends tell us that Moses, long before these fragments rested beneath desert stone, wielded the staff not for glory, but as an instrument of necessity, water for the thirsty, passage through impossible barriers, defiance of tyrants. Each act required a rod that could act independently, that could extend influence without physical presence. To call it a walking staff was perhaps literal, in a sense lost to modern understanding, or metaphorical, in a sense that blends the physical with the spiritual. Even the modern custodians of the fragments felt the weight of responsibility. Museums displayed them under glass, conservationists monitored humidity and light, yet the air around the staff seemed charged with the echo of its ancient commands. Some visitors claimed to hear faint noises, a whisper of sand shifting, a soft tapping, almost imperceptible footsteps, yet when asked, experienced scholars denied hearing anything. The staff remained inscrutable, a bridge between the world of the living and the echo of miracles long past. One might ask, if the staff truly walks without feet, where will it go next? Its path is unknowable. Perhaps it will remain in our time, watched by scholars and visitors alike, or perhaps it has already moved on, appearing in places unmarked on maps, touching lives in ways we cannot measure. Its fragments, however, remain as testimony, as relics that resist finality, that demand attention not only through their material presence, but through the stories and sensations they continue to inspire. The staff is not merely an artifact, it is a living narrative, a continuation of a journey that began millennia ago, carried through legend, miracle, and memory. To witness it is to encounter something beyond history, something that challenges the boundaries of human perception and imagination, and perhaps in the silence of the desert, in the hush of archives, in the quiet of night, the staff continues its eternal walk, unseen but not absent, reminding us that some relics carry with them the pulse of worlds that cannot be fully captured, that must instead be felt, imagined, and revered. Even now, as scholars catalogue, as tourists gaze in wonder, as pilgrims recount tales of parting seas and desert visions, the staff persists, a rod of wood that remembers, a staff that walks without feet, a bridge across time and belief, a silent testament to the human desire to grasp the divine, to command the impossible, and to leave behind a story that will never truly end. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of the staff. It teaches that some objects are not merely objects, some are continuations, echoes, presences. They invite us to witness, to believe, to wonder. They are paths that lead not to answers, but to the edge of understanding, a place where myth and history converge, and where the walking staff still moves, still calls, still reminds us of worlds we have only begun to comprehend.